Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this Common Council meeting for Tuesday, May 25th, 2021. It's a CIP meeting. I'll call the meeting to order. Will you stand for the Pledge of Allegiance?
Roll call.
Oh, roll call first. Sorry, got you all up.
Roll call first.
Fire. Yes. Facial.
Here.
Rosendich.
Here.
Marshall. Wagner. Yes. Witzel.
Yes.
Fisher.
Yes.
Spiros.
Yes.
Bucky. Henler.
Okay, now please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Item C is the public comment period. At this time, the council president will recognize members of the public who have indicated a desire to address the council. On recognition, the council president, persons may address the council, first stating their name and address. The council may act on emergency matters introduced by members of the public. Are there any members of the public who wish to address the council? Any members of the public? Seeing none here, we'll move on to item number D. Complete review from the May 13th meeting of proposed CIP projects by department. UW, Stevens Point, Marshfield campus. Brian, you're up.
Good evening and thank you. We really have an abbreviated list going into this budget session. Dan Kneck and I had met to discuss all of the projects, and the projects that remain are really for health and safety related or for infrastructure related directly to the existing campus buildings. In 2022, we have funding. We've requested funding for sidewalk and parking lot repairs. In 2023, we're not requesting any funding for capital projects. In 2024, there's a request for the replacement of one 200-ton chiller on the west side of the campus buildings. In 2025, we have requested for the replacement of the roof, which is over the connector portion of the campus. And then finally, in 2026, we have a request in for replacement of a HVAC rooftop unit, which is heating and cooling. The other projects that Dan and I had talked about and decided we put those into a non-year. Some of them are probably familiar to you from previous requests, some work in the arboretum, renovations to the kitchen, some flooring replacements in a couple areas of the campus buildings, building renovations in the Falcon and Clark areas, some athletic field improvements, fence and parking lot, and then another flooring project that we had originally scheduled or had requested for 2022. We moved that into the non-year. So the projects that remain, like I said, are really related to directly to the infrastructure and the campus building and safety and health related issues. One thing I would want to mention though is our request for 2024 is for the chiller replacement, which sits on the west side of the campus. I brought this to the commission's attention several times. We're having some issues with that chiller. That chiller basically cools the entire west side of the campus, the library, the theater, the black box, the faculty offices, and some other areas and classrooms. That we had scheduled for originally for 2023. We did move that back to 2024, but I just want to make sure that everybody's aware that that cool chiller right now is functioning at half of its capacity. One half of it cannot be repaired, so we are running on one half of that chiller. So in the case that that chiller completely goes down, we will be coming to this council and to the county to see if we could move that funding up in the priority list to have that chiller replaced. Like I said, we have half of it running right now, and part of the issue is with that chiller is the other side is non-repairable. It has a leak in it. So we're relying on half of a 200-ton chiller to chill the west side of the building. So, with that said, like I said, we have a revised CIP project list, and at this time, I'm comfortable with the list, except for the chiller, which I'm concerned about, which is 2024, and our intent is to keep that chiller running if possible till that date. But I just wanted to let you folks know that it may not last that long. So,
Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Panzer? Mr. Witzel?
Thank you. Are these total costs or are these the city portion of these projects?
I believe the documents that you folks are looking at, those are the city portion of it. So it would be 1/2 of the total project cost.
So for the chiller, for example, it's going to be $180,000?
That's correct.
All right, thank you.
That is correct.
Any other questions for Mr. Panzer? Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
Item E, receive updates from staff on questions issued and raised at the May 13th meeting. I think, Steve.
Thank you, Nick. The May 13th meeting, I went back and watched the video, even though I was here, obviously, that night, to see what questions and concerns were still left out there that needed to be followed up on. And I've just got a handful to run by briefly. If I missed something, please let me know, and we'll deal with that. One of the issues of the communications department space, I think Tom Laux sent you an email earlier today. I'm just going to expand on that a little bit because questions were raised about the difference between the first floor space that he used to be renting and the fifth floor space that we are renting now, the former city clerk's office area. The initial lease that we had was for 1,064 square feet. It was 2 offices. It was room 108, as we called it, which is where he put the studio upon moving over there. And then room 104, which was a smaller area that was used for office and ultimately storage of equipment, which is a big need for the communications department. In moving to the 5th floor, they went up from 1,064 feet to roughly 1,500 square feet. The difference was $325 a square foot. I should say not a square foot. That'd be interesting. $325 a month between the lease payments. We were paying about $1,061 a month previously, and now we're paying $1,386 a month for the expanded space. But it does better meet the needs of Tom and David and their department up there. They've got room to work. They've got a nice studio up there. So the $325 a month seems reasonable for the additional space. The old lease cost from the first floor space was $11.97 per square foot. Now it's $11.09 per square foot, about $1 less per square foot for the 5th floor space compared with the first floor space. It was also brought up whether or not ultimately the communications department were looking at moving to the 2nd Street Community Center. The lease right now runs through March of 2014, so I've got everything wrong tonight. I need some food. March of 2024, so another nearly 3 years on the 5th floor of City Hall. But then would we look at building out a space in the 2nd Street Community Center? That hasn't been determined. It's a possibility. Right now it's kind of on the back burner, but I talked to Justin a little bit. Maybe he and Tom can explore whether or not that's the best move for the communications department a couple of years down the road. It was also asked what the lease payments are of existing tenants over there. North Central Workforce Development Board is leasing 650 square feet, in which they're paying $625 a month or $7,500 a year for that space, $11.54 a square foot. Marshfield Area Community Foundation is leasing 400 square feet, for which they're paying $440 a month, which comes to $13.20 a square foot. So both of them are in basically that $11 to $13 per square foot range. The only other regular tenant that we have, and I'll expand on that in a moment, is the museum in the basement. They are leasing 3,200 square feet roughly, and we did assign a lease rate, but we're not charging them. There was a lot of discussion a few years ago about the value that the museum brings to the community and about the fact that they run on a shoestring. So we do have an assigned lease that talks about $2.50 a square foot for that basement space. We have not been charging rent to date. Those are the main ongoing ones. We do have an arrangement with ADRC for the congregate dining, but that's more limited and it's not a regular full-time lease. The only other thing I'd note, and I must have crossed wires with Ron Ullman, our finance director, because I thought he was going to be here tonight, but maybe he thought the 6 o'clock meeting is when this was happening. I'm not sure. Because I know Ed had brought up a really good question about the American Rescue Plan Act, that a lot of people are talking about the stimulus. And the city of Marshfield has a big $1.8 million dedicated to its name right now, which makes your eyes kind of light up about the possibilities. There have been a lot of seminars, workshops, webinars about this. You've seen some things on the documents that I send you from the league, talking about possible uses of ARPA money. The focus of ARP is supposed to be on infrastructure, roads, bridges, those kind of things. But if you've been following it, there's other opportunities as well, potentially. Those are considered fairly safe opportunities for us to look at in the future. Things like broadband and Wi-Fi and fiber extensions may also be things that we can use those money for in the future. There are cities who have their eyeballs bigger than that I think are looking at things that go beyond infrastructure. And I think they have to be pretty cautious at this point because, and Ron has reminded me of this a few times, the last thing we want to be is in this position where we spend hundreds of thousands of dollars and then have to repay it because it turns out it wasn't eligible in the first place. So Ron is suggesting caution. I know we have department heads that are working hard to come up with a list of projects for when that day comes. Like I said, we're paying attention to all the webinars and seminars we can. But I think we want to let the waters calm a little bit and make sure we know what's going to be considered acceptable before we talk about spending it. But that's obviously a huge opportunity. I think for this 5-year plan update, 2022 to 2026, we shouldn't get talking about ARPA as a funding source for projects because we just don't know enough. But ultimately down the road, this may be a funding source for some of the projects that are farther out on the 5-year plan. With that, I would take any questions about either the communications department or the ARPA.
Mr. Wagner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Isn't there a special provision in ARPA that you can't use it to displace anything that's already been scheduled or anything that's already been planned? And how far in advance does that count? I mean, if we're planning on spending in the 5th year of the CIP, $100,000, $1,000,000, $1,000,000 on, let's say the East 17th Street. Yeah, I thought I'd get him. I know he's awake. But anyway, that's just as an example. If we had already scheduled that and put it into the CIP, we couldn't displace that with American Rescue Program money.
No, that's my understanding as well, although I'm not as familiar with the plan as I probably need to be ultimately. Typical for grant programs from federal and state government is they don't want you to be using the money to do things you were going to do anyway. Now, just because we put a road or some other project like that on the plan for 2024 doesn't mean that when it gets there, we're going to do it. We might have our own funding and borrowing concerns. But yeah, they want to try and make sure to the best of their ability that you're not going to be using their money to do something that was going to happen regardless of them. So that will be an issue that we have to keep in mind.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions for Steve or any of the other staff members? Seeing none, we'll move on to item F, identify and discuss possible changes desired by council members. Any council members have changes they want to make? Mr. Wagner.
Yes, basically, I know tonight in our regular meeting, we're going to be discussing the city subdivision. And I know that is, I know it was not brought up for the CIP because it's going to happen this year. But it does, if the funding scheme that we've got on the books now is accepted, that means that a lot of the things that are showing up in the 2021 through 2025 or 2024 CIP that would require drawdowns from the Economic Development Fund, the 205 fund, that money won't be there. So that changes things there. And it also changes, well, I think what we're planning on doing for 2022 through 2026. So I'd like Josh to come up and explain how he plans to deal with that.
Yeah, thank you. As far as the 205 fund goes, I mean, the plan is really to replenish that through the lot sales. We hope to have those done prior to starting the project, or at least done within a year. So I would imagine that a lot of the funding that we would spend up front from the 205 fund would be replenished through the sales of the lots. That's how we would address that. As far as the CIP goes, I think I talked to Dan a little bit about that. I think one of the things we talked about is possibly moving, I think, the fire squad from 2025 out to a non-year. That's almost a $700,000 project, and that would make room for this type of borrowing.
Couldn't hear, what did you want, what program was that?
Let me see here. What's that? Squad 1 replacement for the fire department?
I don't think the fire chief is gonna be real thrilled that you're messing with his budget. What are you gonna do about your budget?
What's that?
What are you gonna do about your 2025?
Well, I don't
Because
have any.
you've got, over the period of the 5 years, you've got 825,000 scheduled in payments. Next year alone, 250,000. Of course, you're replacing that with a 900,000. But then you've got, 100,000 years in 24, 25, and 26. And you've got, 20,000 for the downtown, facade program. Well, 70,000 this year, or 22. And then 23 is 20,000, and then 20,000 and 20,000 all the way to 26. You're not gonna have that money back in that time. Let's put it this way. You say you're gonna have that money back, but how do you know?
Well, we don't know, and obviously, I mean, we would certainly be flexible with our planning. If for some reason the lots didn't come through and we weren't able to do some of these projects, you know, we could back out of the facade program, we could look at the Wenzel Family Plaza programming. We hope to have it back. Our goal is to have, and we'll talk more about it later and in closed session as far as the lots that we have pre-sold, but we feel pretty confident that the lots are going to sell and there is very much interest in it. So if we don't get the lots that we envisioned sold, we would modify what our budget is for each year going forward.
So the question is, do we put that money, if you spend that 900,000, you're gonna have a little over $200,000 left in that fund.
The projection, I think, was about 250,000 at the end of the year based on our projects for the remainder of 2021.
Right. And that's the other thing about this year's projects. What are you going to, what is the total of this year's projects without, I've got it here somewhere, but,
One thing I would the revenue that we get from the dividend each year is around $230,000. And our goal would be to not deficit spend for the next few years if we don't have that cash reserve. So we could still continue to operate from the EDB's perspective. And these numbers are within that $230,000 dividend payment. So we're not operating at a deficit using fund balance. So even if we spent the whole $900,000, didn't get a dime of that back, we could still operate on a yearly basis because the dividend payment comes in every April.
but you couldn't do the projects you were planning on taking. You're, in the past couple of years, you've actually been dipping into that 205 fund to fund the operating expenses, or projects, I should say.
A little bit, not a ton though. I mean, we still have,
About 20,000 a year?
give or take, yeah.
Yeah, and that's above and beyond that allocation you're gonna receive from the utility, right?
But yeah, correct. But we can back off some things. If the worst case scenario happened, now, we will get some revenue from those lots. I'm certain some of those lots will sell at we think it'll happen quicker, but if it doesn't happen immediately, over the years, we will be selling lots. So, I mean, that revenue will come back at some point.
Well, I'm gonna remain skeptical on that. I'm gonna suggest that, we be prepared, to basically do some budget amendments at the beginning of 2022 if the money doesn't come back.
Mr. Fisher.
Since we're talking about this, I will make some comments. One, I strongly dislike deficit spending. I'm on the Economic Development Board, and I've shared some concerns with the fact that we have deficits, or we have done deficit spending in the past. And I'll be honest, I think this is a good lesson for the Economic Development Board, that we really have to have a tight budget moving forward. I believe in this project, and I think we need to do it. I do have one concern, though, and that is more or less why we're getting rid of the squad. Like, what was the rationale for that project? Was it not as essential? I'd like to know the reasoning as to why it was that.
Yeah, thanks. So the squad was due to be replaced in 2024, actually. And it hasn't put on a whole lot of miles, so we decided we can move that back, and actually we've moved it back to 2025 as it is. But it could probably go a little bit longer. We're trying to get as much life out of it as we possibly can. So we're not getting rid of it, it's just hanging on to it a little longer.
Okay, so you believe then that this can be pushed back and it's not gonna hurt the operation of the fire department?
It's already been pushed back 1 year. I don't know how far, but certainly a couple of years, we'd be fine.
All right, thank you.
Any other items by council members? Mr. Witzel.
Thank you. I'm just gonna weigh in on something that's coming up in the future. Just, I guess to throw my 2 cents worth in there. The sign out there with the digital insert in the communications department. I guess I would shy away from that. I know that there's been some concerns expressed about the safety of that particular corner. I think there's some potential visibility issues, whether it's, buildings that are tight to the corner or whatnot. And I just think it's something that it's a bell and whistle that we don't need. I think just a simple insert that maybe gave something about the city in place of that, I think would be helpful. And it would take that money off. I know it's not much, but I don't, I feel fairly strongly about it, and I don't want you to waste a lot of time doing a lot of work for something that I don't think really should happen.
Any other changes that anyone wants to talk about? Seeing none, we'll move on to item G. Discuss and reach consensus on the CIP with any accepted council adjustments. The plan would be set for final approval at the June 8th council meeting. Did you want anything, any motions to remove items, or are we comfortable going forward with what is there now? Mr. Fisher.
Well, I have a question. I know there were a couple items at the last meeting that staff had recommended removing. Is that still the recommendation to remove those items? I believe there was one item or two.
Mr. Bard.
I believe there were 3. That's a good question. I believe there were 3, 2 of which were accepted and moved to approval by this body. The third one involving, I think, the housing incentive program was rejected to pull that. So those actions have already been considered. 2 of them have been approved. One of them was on assessing. The other was on a library project, I think, that was put out there by Jill Porter that could be removed. So you don't need to do anything on those. Those have already been documented.
Is it still the recommendation, though, to remove the housing? I mean, that would still be the recommendation, correct?
Yeah, I think it was at the time, and I think it still would be, given if we're going forward with the housing, the city subdivision, that would replace that effort.
Well, I'm going to try one more time to make a motion to remove that from the CIP. Thank you.
Second by Mr. Witzel. Is there any discussion on that? Mr. Witzel.
I think one of the reasons why this didn't fly a week and a half ago was because we were hoping to have the council meeting to decide what we were doing with the housing. And unfortunately, here we find ourselves before the council meeting to know what's happening with that proposed subdivision. So I think I'll vote for this. It's kind of the chicken egg situation, and it's unfortunate that we don't have the results of the next meeting in front of us to know what's going to happen.
Yeah, I agree, and sometimes we do things in backwards order, but I think for the most part, if, economic development kind of comes upon us sometimes, and you try to plan as best as you can. And like I talked about, a lot of the things that we have in the CIP don't reflect things that you would do for TIF expenditures or incentives or things like that. So if there's things that come up and we need to act on it, we will certainly bring back a project if it's needed.
And what year was that in, Josh?
That was in 2022.
Okay. Mr. Wagner.
To remove Project 4016013, which is the Housing Incentive Program from the CIP.
Any further comments? Seeing none, roll call vote.
Fire? Paschal?
Yes.
Rosendich?
Yes.
Marshall?
Yes.
Wagner? Yes. Witzel?
Yes.
Fisher?
Yes.
Sparrows?
yes,
That motion carries unanimously. Are there any other, Mr. Witzel?
I guess I'll move to remove, item 105-8503, upgrading of the exterior city hall digital signage item from 2023.
Second by Mr. Wagner, were you seconding? Mr. Fisher, were you seconding? Okay. I saw hands raising, but maybe there were fingers pointing. Are there any comments or questions on that?
My question is, what year is this being repaired?
It's supposed to be replaced in 2023, but again, I mentioned that I don't want to have prep work done now of quotes and finalizations of plans in the next year if it's just not even going to happen. So,
This is a $10,000 project, is that correct?
yes,
Do you understand how vital that could be to the city? If people want to say you've got something going on in the city, somebody could call City Hall and you can put on there what's happening in the city. We don't have many city scrolling reader boards. We just don't. The only way you can get one is if you call the fair's got one. And that's about the only one that I know in town that you can get something on. So we don't have anything to announce what the city is going to do, like Maple Fall Fest, whatever. And where it sits is not gonna be distraction to anybody. It's just not. It's like they got them at the churches. The churches won't let you put anything on it, but the churches got them all over. So I don't see it's just $10,000. I mean, if it was $100,000, then I'd say yes, but for $10,000, it has a value to the community.
Tom?
I also just wanted to remind you that it is coming out of the franchise fees budget and not anything with general fund, if that makes a difference. So it's coming out of the communications budget.
Okay. Thank you. Any further comments on that? We have a motion and a second to remove, what's the item number?
105-8503.
From the CIP. Any further questions or comments? See none, please vote. Roll call.
Fire?
No.
Paschal?
No.
Rosendich?
No.
Marshall?
No.
Wagner? Yes. Witzel?
yes,
Fisher?
Yes.
Sparrows?
yes,
It's a tie.
We have a tie vote, so the motion fails.
Fails.
Any other items that we want to adjust on the CIP? Going once? Seeing none? Do we have to, you want a motion to accept the CIP, or that'll be on the June 8th?
It would.
The motion to accept would be on the next meeting, right?
Yeah, it's not on the agenda, but you could make a motion to send the CIP in the form that you have it right now with the changes that were made tonight and the previous meeting to the June 8th meeting for final consideration.
I will make that motion,
Okay.
Mr. President.
Do we have a second? Second by Mr. Rosendich. Any discussion on that? Seeing none, please vote. Roll call.
Fire?
Yes.
Paschal?
Yes.
Rosendich?
Yes.
Marshall?
Yes.
Wagner? Yes. Witzel?
yep,
Fisher?
Yes.
Sparrows?
yes,
Okay, moving on to item number 8, suggested items for future agendas. And since this is a CIP meeting, we probably don't have any future meetings. And then I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion by Mr. Fire, second by Mr. Rosendich. All in favor? And signify by saying aye. We're adjourned.